Hello everyone, my name is William, and today we're going to be talking about if statements. Now I have a script already added here, so let's go to it. So what we're going to want to do is I'm going to explain to you how if statement work. Now let's say you have two variables here, right? So public integer player 1 wins and a public integer player 2 wins. Now let's say you only want to play this player 1 wins if and only if this is greater than the player 2 wins. Well, we can do that with if statements. So how if statements work is that they run if and only if the expression inside is true. So let's type if player 1 wins is greater than player 2 wins. So if this is the case, then what we're going to do is we're going to print out player 1 wins. So now let's go to our script, our Unity game, and let's check it out here. So player 1 wins, let's set player 2 wins to 1 and play. And as we can see, because in the if statement it doesn't play, nothing plays in the console, which is good. But if, let's say, player 2 gets more wins, we're going to print out player 1 wins. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go back to if statement, and we're going to want to make a new let's say you want this, you don't want it to end here, right? You want to play it if player 2 has more than player 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an else if statement. Now how else if statements work is that they're just like if statements, except they only run if and only if this is false and this ends up being true. So if this is false, then what that means is that player 2 wins is greater than player 1 wins. So we're going to check for this statement. And if this is true, then we're going to print, instead of that, we're going to print player 2 wins. So let's go here and run again. And it still says player 1 wins, but let's go and change player 2 wins to 3. Run it. And then it will say player 2 wins, see? So that's how it works. But we have another dilemma. What if we want the base default case to be tie? So let's say they both have 3. Well, what happens? Well, nothing runs. So what we want to do is we want to check here, and we want to make an else statement. And how an else statement works is that if all of these conditionals before it are false, then we default on this. So then print it's a tie. Now here's a tip about if-else statements. You can have as many else-if statements in here. So you can have one here, one here. You can have as many conditions as you want, but for the sake of argument, let's say there's only one if, one else if, and one else. Well, there's only one if and one else, but you can have as many else-ifs as you want. Just to give you some advice. And so let's play this. And apparently it's a tie. So yeah. So now that we've discussed if statements, let's discuss something else that's a little bit more useful, because you don't want to write as many else if statements as you want. Let's say it does get tedious. So let's say we only want a lot, but we don't want to write all of this out. Now what we can do is we can do a switch statement, and it's like a if statement. It's just that it's easier to read. And only works with one variable, so it's not entirely useful. But so let's do public int sword ID. So what we're going to do here is we're going to switch sword ID. So we're going to pass sword ID into this switch statement. And so what we're going to check for is different cases. So case 0. So sword ID is equal to 0. Then we're going to want to print out wooden sword. And then you're always going to want to break after you have a case. And then let's say the case is 1. Then we're going to want to print out regular sword. And then we're going to want to break again. Make sure to always break or else you get errors. And let's say the case of the ID is 2. So then we're going to want to print out you have a laser sword. And then let's break again. Now let's say all these turn out to be false, right? Well, there's another way, like an else statement, where you can do default, and default pretty much runs if all others are false. So print sword not found, like an error code, and let's break. And so let's go back here and let's run it to see how it works. So as we can see, it says wooden sword. Let's change sword ID to 1 and we get regular sword. Change it to 2 and we get, you have a laser sword. And let's change it to -1 out of bounds because there's no condition for it, and it'll go back to default. Sword not found. Now this is only useful if you have one variable. You can't have multiple variables here. If you have multiple variables, you have to use an if statement. So that's how that works. So let's delete all this and let's talk about inputs. So let's go to the scripting API and let's talk about this. So if you search in the scripting API for input.getKey, you'll get many results. But let's look at, so this may be a little overwhelming, but let's just look at the key codes. So I mean input.getKey. So what this does is returns true while the user holds down the key identified by name. So think of autofire, such as if you're pressing it down, such as for movement or for firing automatically, this would be most useful. And so if input.getKey up, then you print this. So that's where if statements are useful for a lot, for inputs. So here's, and if you want to know which exact key you want, there's if you look up key code, you'll get all these different variables, such as all these buttons you can press down on the keyboard. So let's go here, and let's say we want to do walking, right? So if input.getKey down key code.a, then we're going to want to do is we're going to want to say print. Oh, we're going to do keycode.getKey, not key down. Sorry, that's for later. Then we're going to want to print out moving up. Now let's run this. And let's see what happens when I'm going to press A. Now I'm pressing A and we're moving up very fast. Every single frame just runs if you're holding it down. So now I'm stopped holding it, and as we can see, it stopped running. And so let's say we want to check if they're pressing A and pressing W. So let's do 2 ampersands. What this does is it essentially means and. So if this is true and something else is true, so if you're getting key down and A, and if you're getting key W, then moving up and left. So let's see what happens when I press play. Okay, I'm pressing A, nothing's happening. I'm pressing W, nothing's happening. But look what happens when I'm pressing both of them at the same time. It says I'm moving up and left. So that's useful if you want to check for things such as movement or you know, such other keyboard inputs like that. And then let's say you want to get something only every frame, right? So let's say if input.getKey down, this is only true for one frame is held down. If keycode.getDown keycode.f, then what that means is we want to print fired something. So you know you fired something, like the fire button. So let's press play, and then when I'm pressing F, see, look, I'm holding it down, but it only runs once when I press the button. So that's useful for things such as if you only for like some automatic fire or anything else like one-time input, like jumping. And let's say you want this or something else. So then, like and for 2 ampersands for and, there's 2 of these straight down lines for or. What this means that if this is true or if something else is true, in this case if get key down V, then we fire something. So let's say there's no key code. Let's say you have 2 buttons for firing. Then let's see what happens. press F, this fired, I press V, this fired, and I press both of them at the same time. And it runs only if you press it down. So every time you press the button. And there's one more you want to know about. So this one is about getting a key up. So if input.get key up keycode.c, then what we're going to do is we're going to want to print out lifted released button. And what this does is it checks if you release a key up. So I've pressed C, I'm holding it down, and then I released it. And what that does is so it only checks if you press up the button. So this is useful if you want to do things such as buttons or anything that only works after you press it up. And that's it for if statements and input, and in the next lesson we're going to be talking about something very fun, and that's about arrays and lists. Thank you, and I'll see you next tutorial.